All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick are doing 2024 preview and prediction for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Looking at this coaching staff, largely remains intact in Matt Rhule's second year after a 5-7 debut season. Marcus Satterfield as the OC, and Tony White, a guy who was getting a lot of potential looks to be at different programs or even maybe as a head coach at lower tier programs. Really good defensive coordinator they got from Syracuse last year. Likely probably going to be his last year here in the program, I would assume. And looking at the kind of the recap for them, they pulled a stunner at the deadline to land Dylan Raiola via flip from Georgia. And then, they lost another 5 games by 1 score. It just continues to be the theme here at Nebraska, Nick. Why is this just a connotation with Nebraska that they lose these 1-score games? And it's every single year, and it's every single game.
It's such a bizarre thing when you look at it because you can't really blame coaching now they're on a different coach. Scott Frost obviously was fired and removed as head coach. Matt Rhule came in, and the losing those single score games continued. We saw it week 1 against Minnesota in the season opener last year. They were playing well in that game. Looked like they could potentially win that game. Then they had a bad interception late in the game and then gave up a game-winning field goal to lose that game to open the season and open his tenure in Lincoln, Nebraska. I don't really understand it. It's kind of like a weird thing that this seems to haunt this team. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and they're really going to have to find a way to shake this because it's going to continue to cost them. It cost them a spot in a bowl game last year. If you flip 2 of those results there, they can find themselves in a bowl game at 7-5. So they really want to, or even at 6-6, they could have found themselves in a bowl game, quite frankly. So you got close, you get really close in year 1, Matt Rhule. If they can kind of shore things up and close out those close games, this team can be very successful this year and find themselves back in a bowl game for the first time in a couple of years for Nebraska.
They won 3 in a row, and then they lost 4 in a row to end the year, all, again, by 1 score. And a big reason for that, Nick, was just horrid offense. 17 points or less in all 4 of those contests, only averaged 18 per game. Just wasn't a very good unit. Obviously, they ran the ball pretty well, but I think the biggest thing here was just the quarterback play was horrendous. As a team, 52% completion rating, 10 touchdowns to 16 interceptions, 136 yards per game passing. I mean, these are just horrendous numbers in the quarterback position. They thought they potentially had a good starter in Jeff Sims, and he just proved to be, terrible when it comes to decision-making, ball protection. He only had 1 touchdown to 6 picks, and now he's done transferred out of the program after getting the keys early on in the year. And that's what leads you to Dylan Raiola. And it felt like from the start that this was just the best fit. Obviously, the lineage that went to the school, a guy who, as a high-end recruit going to Georgia, he was probably going to have to sit for a couple of years. And nobody wanted to see that, Nick. We all wanted to see him at Nebraska. This is a guy who generates good velocity on throws. We can change that said velocity and layer the ball at a high level. Does a real good job of running as well. Moves well and is a fluid player. Great deep ball. Overall considered an NFL caliber arm. He also protected the ball very well at the high school level. You want to see him to be able to do that as he steps up in competition. This offense is going to be his from day one, Nick. You have no way around it. This position was horrid last year. 5-star recruit. This kid's obviously going to have some growing pains, but the upside here is tremendous. And Hendon Harbaugh is still around. He was, I guess, respectable as a starter, but really didn't do much to elevate them as a passer. Was the leading rusher for them. So maybe they'll get creative and continue to have him in play. But Raiola is the man here, Nick, and I'm excited.
Raiola is the man. This is a perfect opportunity for a true freshman to step in and be a star. He had a very interesting recruiting cycle, if you remember correctly. He was in high school. He transferred. He ended up playing in high school in Georgia, finished off his career playing high school in Georgia at Buford, Georgia, which many felt was kind of the nail in the coffin that he was going to stick it out and go to Athens. Buford, one of the top teams in the state of Georgia, a really incredible team that continuously pumps out talent. That commits to Alabama and Georgia, and they also compete for state titles frequently. He had a really solid season in high school, a high-ranking 4-star, number 2 quarterback in the class, number 7 player nationally, number 1 player in the state of Georgia. And on December 18th, flips the commitment last second to Nebraska, following in the footsteps of his father. There was some, a lot of talks about how much NIL was involved, whether or not there was tampering involved. Some tampering potentially involving Herb Street was discussed as well. I'm not going to really look into any all that. I think this is a guy that's just an incredible quarterback that can really step up game 1 and be ready to go. We saw him in the spring game. Now, of course, everything in a spring game you take with a grain of salt, but I thought he looked really good in the spring game, looked comfortable in his first sort of action in with a college offense against a college defense. This is a guy at 6'3", 220 out of high school that has a really solid arm, high football IQ, really good fundamentals already. I think you're going to continue to grow on that. He has a decent supporting cast around him year 1. I think the sky's the limit. Obviously, there will be some tough growing pains. There'll be some mistakes early on. The schedule, though, is a little forgiving, so there will be opportunities for him to make mistakes that may not cost them entirely. I think this is a really high-risk, high-reward move to start him week 1, and I'm super excited to see what it looks like.
Really good stuff by Rule to go from what I would say was probably the worst QB room in America to landing a top high-end recruit to really fix that. And you look at the rest of the supporting cast you alluded to, the running back room was incredibly beat up. Gabe Irvin started off the year good. A guy who's 6'2", 220. He ended up getting hurt. Likely going to be the starting back this season. Ramir Johnson, he's a shifty runner who also got hurt after only 3 games. Emmett Johnson ended up being forced into action, showcasing some nice agility match. A good combo with size and speed. And then an ex-4-star from Oregon and Dante Dowdell is also in the fold. Again, this is a running game that was, pretty much leaned on a good bit. Anthony Grant departs. And Johnson, as a freshman, ended up having 4'11", 2 touchdowns. And the aforementioned Harburg, Nick, I think he might get on the field in some capacity in special sets, maybe in short yardage, maybe in goal line. I think this is certainly going to be a run game, though, especially with the health that's going to be improved, is going to be very good.
I think this is a running back room that has some potential to develop and be solid for this team. Gabe Irvin only played in 3 games last year, but he had nearly 200 yards rushing in those 3 games, 1 score, 5.2 yards per carry. So solid numbers in his limited snaps. Obviously, battled health, but he'll be able to find his way back this year. I think it's a really solid thing to have. Emmett Johnson is a guy that's a really solid player. The 2 Johnsons in general, Emmett Johnson, I like him a lot. 411 yards on the ground, 4.6 yards per carry, and 2 scores for him. Ramir Johnson didn't have a whole lot of touches, but a guy that still can be potentially involved in this offense and really sort of develop and build around. You spoke about the other quarterback in Harburg, who had 5 touchdowns and 447 yards on the ground, 4 yards per carry. What is he going to look like? Are they going to try and utilize him in different roles this year? I think you can certainly find a way to utilize him. I think this is a running back room that has room to grow and has some potential to be really solid in the Big Ten.
This is the team that does return 7 starters. They lose their top running back in the aforementioned Grant. And then Billy Kemp, their top receiver, is gone, who I think, if he had better quarterback play, could have really been a good player for them. I thought he was good at Virginia. And obviously he departs, not ending his career on a great note. But you look at a room here I'm very happy with, because you're going to start with a guy in Jamal Banks, who comes over from Wake Forest, a good route runner with some IQ, great catch radius, matched with soft, natural hands, possession pass catcher, 6'4", 205. Malachi Coleman, this was a big recruiting win early on in Rule's tenure. Size, that was him that went outside, 6'4", 190 with ball tracking. And he's got a good top gear when it comes to running downfield, highly athletic player. He was also impressive as a defensive end in high school, so he certainly has that flexibility. Isaiah Neowar, a known speed guy who has only played 1 game in 2 years, had a torn ACL in 22. Had a big season all the way back in 21 with Wyoming. Really not sure if he's going to be able to contribute, since he has just not been on the field the last couple of seasons. Another guy here in Jalen Lloyd, a 5'10", 160 speedster, enters his second year. And this is a guy that, had 237 yards and only 6 catches, half of those going for touchdowns. So this is a guy you want to try to force the ball to. Alex Bullock was the, third leading team, player in targets, that is, on the team. Just an experienced player, if anything. They have a 3-star true freshman, Shakori Barney, figures to get, potential playing time. Isaiah Garcia Castaneda has battled injuries as well the last 2 seasons, coming off a torn ACL, but he was atop the depth chart in week 1 of last season. Has shown the ability to come down with tough contested catches in New Mexico State. Overall, I think this is a room with good upsides. I think they have some nice versatility as well. Thomas Fadone, the tight end, really impressed. He was a sound pass catcher. He had the 2nd most targets on the team. He's also a solid blocker as well. And I'd say this is a greatly revamped wide receiver room, Nick. Really not sure what Neowar is going to provide. You're hoping Coleman can really take that next level. But Jalen Lloyd, a guy who really just exploded for them late in the season. He had, a catch in each of the final 5 games, 3 of them going for 50-plus yards. Again, he had a trio with touchdowns there. This is a guy they need to get the ball to downfield.
Jalen Lloyd's a very exciting player. You saw a small sample size of him, 6 receptions, but 39.5 yards per grab is a really eye-opening number. 237 yards total and 3 scores. They got to find a way to get the ball to him early and often. He could be Dylan Raiola's best friend early on. I think Thomas Fadone, the tight end, is a really exciting player. 260 yards receiving for him, 10.4 yards per grab, and 4 scores last year. Alex Bullock, 221 yards receiving, 14.7 yards per grab, and 1 score for him as well. Malachi Coleman, 139 yards receiving, 17.4 yards per catch, and 1 score for him through 8 games. So I think there is a nice amount of depth here. You spoke about some other transfers and players that could step up, true freshmen that could step up as well. This is a room that has some nice depth to it, and when you have a really solid quarterback play like we potentially see with Dylan Raiola, this could be really solid for this team.
Look at the offensive line at unit that's certainly come under plenty of scrutiny here in Nebraska. I thought they played better last year. Obviously still a work in progress. Teddy Proshka, he got the start in the final 5 games at left tackle. He had a pretty big impact. Seemed to be much better than Tucker Cochran, who appears to be moving to right guard. Micah Muzakawa has been a real asset over the last few seasons. His respective schools, Baylor and Florida, especially in the run game. So I think this is going to be a good ad for them. Justin Evans at left guard, 6'1", 315, played in all 12 games, was a really sound player in pass protection, mainly playing bulk of his snaps in the final month of the season, though. Ben Scott, 6'5", 305, had a pretty good year as the starting center. He's got good grit and toughness. Needs to tone down the aggression at times as he sparks some unnecessary penalties. Bryce Benhart played much better this past season, 6'9", 315, but he does enter his sixth season of football, so what is left of his ceiling, I wonder. 2,700 snaps under his belt. I think this is a good offensive line that should, sizably be better, but it's also possible that the improvement is limited. A lot of experience here, though, for the most part, Nick, is really the takeaway. Again, you have a big transfer in Mazukawa, who's probably going to get on the field in some capacity. Some of these players aren't all that great, but again, the experience factor is something that's always going to be a leg up.
Michael Mazzucchello is a really solid add out of the portal. What's he going to look like? Is he going to slot in at left guard? Is he going to potentially play center or tackling? There's some room for him. He played at Florida and Baylor in the past, so he's a guy that has some nice experience at different levels. I think Justin Evans is okay at left guard if you're not going to start Mazzucchello. I think that's certainly where you lean there. Ben Scott is a really solid, serviceable center. Turner Cochran as well is a really solid, and Bryce Benhart is really good at left tackle, or right tackle, that is. I think left tackle, Teddy Pruska is a solid player as well. The depth does worry me a little bit. I think there's a little bit of a lack in depth here. I think this is a unit that's getting better as time goes on. Rule's going to have to build and develop in the trenches. I like some of the size here, though. I think overall the offensive line is getting better slowly but surely, but it's definitely going to be a work in progress in Lincoln.
Looking at the verdict for this offense, none of the three quarterbacks averaged over 100 yards per game passing last season, and the turnovers from that position was just flat out laughable. This team led the nation in most giveaways, but they are, in the end, they ended up landing a prized gem at quarterback that might just elevate this program to contention and then some. And Dylan Raiola, the supporting cast has a variety of different options. While the offensive line has lots of experience, all facets of this offense should improve. A great tune, but a true freshman under center may have some struggles. Lots of upside here, Nick. I think this is a unit that can take some massive leaps, though, of what they have around him.
It's a very exciting offense with Dylan Raiola getting the keys. I think some of the supporting cast is strong enough to support him on day one. This is a once in a generation type of quarterback to have at a program like Nebraska, and certainly could jumpstart and change your fortunes very early on. I like the wide receiver room. I think the running back room has some solid depth. I think the tight end play will be good this year. I think the offensive line is improving. This is a unit that can really only go up 18 points per game. Last year, 123rd in the nation. Bottom in terms of yards per game and bottom in terms of pass yards per game in the nation, 129th in pass yards per game, 117th in the nation in yards per game. They were pretty solid on the ground last year. So the combination of that really solid running back room that brings back some good players, plus a new star quarterback in, you could really see this offense turn around. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect them to get to 28, 29 points per game this year.
Okay, the defensive side of the ball, this is a unit we certainly expected to be quite sound, but I didn't expect them to be this good. Top 10 against the run, top 15 in points and yards per game as well. A team that returned 7 starters, lost 7 guys in the portal, only added 3. Very experienced duo on this defensive line in Ty Robinson and Nash Hutchmacher. These guys are back. Great strength by both, but the latter is the one who was the better performer. Was good versus the run. Also, really impressive interior pass rusher in Hutchmacher. He was productive. A guy who was a wrestler for the school, has great hands and grip. I think this is going to be a big breakout player this season. Jamari Butler, contemplated transferring before the start of last year, ended up being their top edge player. So they're able to return him, before the season started last year. He ended up being great at 6'4", 245. Cam Lenhart was pretty solid as a true freshman. He and Elijah Judy, who was pretty quiet, will be the backups, while Riley Van Poppel, 6'5", 275, was used in extra lineman sets, mostly also as a true freshman. Good growth is expected from this part of the defense. I think this is a defensive line that's quite sound. Obviously, this is a Tony White defense that runs that 3-3-5, Nick. But I love this starting 3 they have of Robinson, Hutchmacher, and Butler. Productive unit, a talented unit as well, and I think that the experience that the backups gained last year is going to lead to massive improvements for what was already a strong run defense.
I think it's a very strong run defense. It's going to return some solid players. Hutchmacher is a really good player. 40 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks for him, plus 2 pass breakups. Butler, 34 total tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks for him, plus 2 pass breakups. Your top returning getter. In terms of tackles for loss and sacks last year, solid numbers there. Ty Robinson, 29 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and 6 pass breakups. Some solid depth down the bottom of the depth chart as well. Elijah Judy, I like him. I think he could potentially be involved. 8 total tackles for him last year as more of a backup role. Some other players up there that you alluded to that could be solid. Cameron Lanehart, he only played in 10 games, had limited snaps with 16 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. As a true freshman, he could look really good this year as well. I like the front part of this defense a lot. I think there's some really solid players here.
And obviously, against the run, they only allowed over 170 rushing yards once. That was a beatdown against Michigan, 249 and 3 scores. That gave up almost 5 yards per carry. They just weren't ready to compete. That was the first month of this new coaching staff, a new regime, and obviously I don't think that's going to be an accurate representation of what's going to happen long term here at Nebraska. I definitely think this is a good defensive line. They're just outclassed that day against the national champions. No slouch there one bit. Look at the linebacking unit, another part of this defense. It's pretty exciting. Next walk-on and John Bullock proved to be a tough, gritty asset, especially against the run. I was happy with his production last season. Former 5-star from Georgia, MJ Sherman, established himself as a starter for 2024. Was very productive, though. Never really felt his presence much, though. Javen Wright was a great player despite only starting in one game. He's going to become the full-time middle linebacker, only 6'5", 215. So I want to see how he handles more physicality, but was quite fluid in style versus the run. I thought he was great in coverage as well. Stephon Thompson, destined to see the field. He reunites with Tony White, an elite tackler. Only 8 career missed tackles and 1,500 snaps, was hurt in 22, but in 21, he was a good pass rusher, made negative plays in the backfield often for Syracuse. Mekhi Gabor played a good bit, but wasn't all that impressive. Princewell Unimanellan, he was really good, I would say, as a true freshman. Against the run, dropped in the coverage, at least in short area coverage pretty well. Another pretty stout unit here, Nick, that should certainly be better. They have starters that they like, and they also have backups that are going to earn plenty of time as well. What do you make of what's going to be probably a really impressive front six with a lot of experience?
It's a very solid front six with this latter part of that front six being a good unit. I think Wright's a good player, 51 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 2 picks, and 2 pass breakups for him. Solid numbers there. I think he's a guy that could really produce for this unit, move him around potentially at middle linebacker. John Bullock, 50 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss for him as well. Solid numbers there. MJ Sherman, a guy that could really break out this year, 16 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks for him. Princewell Unimanellan as well, 22 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, and 1 sack. So there's some solid numbers across the board here. I think these are some really solid guys in the middle of this defense. They have some nice depth, way to move. Stephon Thompson's a really good add out of the portal. I do like what I see here.
Now looking at the secondary, remember last year one of the things I gave the Cornhuskers praise for was this secondary. I thought they'd be pretty good, and they were. Tommy Hill was exceptional in coverage, showcased good ball skills. The rest of the cornerback unit, though, was a little bit less desirable. Bly Hill, he was a true freshman at St. Francis FCS last year, only one of a few transfers they added, so certainly curious to see how he plays and why he was targeted specifically, especially since it looks like he's going to be forced into a starting role. True sophomore Ethan Nation no longer on the roster. He was expected to make a push for starting time. Dwight Boodley, Mario Buford, incredibly young players will now fight for time at his replacement at corner. Malcolm Hartzong was pretty sound in the slot. He was a very helpful run defender. Started a few games at safety, so has versatility. Isaac Gifford at safety. He was tremendous for them at that position. Was highly productive in all facets. He should contend for an all-conference honors, I'd say, this year. Marquise Buford, played 700 snaps in 2022, got hurt, so didn't play till November, and he played all the last 4 games. He was a great tackler, proved to be a great asset. They got him on the field. He certainly delivered to a good ratio. Deshaun Singleton had won the starting position, but he got hurt after a good start through 5 games. Secondary was very good, didn't allow too many big plays. Outside of the Colorado game, the unit really settled down immensely throughout the year, and they even played pretty well in the Colorado game for the most part, but the offense was putting them in some bad positions. So another unit here, Nick, where there's some injuries, depth is questionable, but at full strength, they seem like they can compete with anybody.
It's a solid unit. I think Isaac Gifford's a really good player. Really, excited to see what he continues to do this year. He's your top returning tackler with 86 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 8 pass breakups, and a pick. So really solid player overall there. Tommy Hill, 4 picks last year for him, 9 pass breakups. Really solid in coverage, 26 total tackles. Marcus Buford Jr., 18 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1 sack for him. Malcolm Hartzog, 40 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 6 pass breakups. Solid numbers there. Bly Hill's a very interesting one. 6'3", 185, coming from the FCS level, playing at St. Francis, PA. Really interested to see what he kind of looks like. Obviously, like you were alluding to, kind of an odd move to jump that high of a move as a former true freshman playing at right center back. Most likely, he is battling really against a true freshman and Mario Buford down the depth chart. So this is going to be his opportunity at right cornerback to step up. What is he going to look like in the jump up in competition? I think Hartzog's a really solid player at nickelback again. You can move around, allude to his stats. So overall, I think the secondary is not a bad unit. I do like this defense in general. It's a very strong defense. I think they're going to be in line for a good season. The passing was like the biggest weakness for this defense last year. 40th against the pass in the nation, 210 yards given up per game. But I do think this is still a very strong secondary unit.
The verdict for this side of the ball, I really like this defense. Return lots of great starters and have some notable depth at all 3 levels. really think they can continue to progress and be physical. Secondary, again, has some of those concerns in terms of depth at corner, but also a part of the defense where, there is talent and good players coming back. Might even contend for a top 10 unit nationally, but will need to prove themselves versus tougher opponents. And, the prediction for Nebraska, this is a team that, we allude to a defense that I think is going to be able to compete. They're physical. The brand of football they can play in this conference is very impressive. It really comes down to the offensive side of the ball, correcting turnovers, letting Raiola, get full control of this offense. Well, there's going to be growing pains with the offensive line, talented weapons. Trying to get these guys all in sync with a run game that's already pretty stout is going to be the message. And they got to be able to do it, Nick. I don't want to see them disappoint because I really think they can show impressive, strides on this side of the ball. But cutting down turnovers, getting away from the silly ball that they've played under Scott Frost and even showcased at times last year is going to be the biggest thing here. Everyone's expecting them to finally break the curse and get back to a bowl game. The schedule's made for it. The total 7.5. I have them, hitting that 7-8 wins. Should be what they accomplish. If they don't, Nick, it's going to be incredibly disappointing. 4-0 for me is going to be the start, and then we'll see how they do in conference play. They should easily beat Colorado, I'd say, week 2, a game that's going to be incredibly massive. They want revenge from last year. It's obviously going to be a team coming in with, a lot of attention, a lot of eyes in the Buffaloes. I see them going 8-4. This team should make a bowl game, and I think we're going to see great improvement from Nebraska.
I'm very high on the Nebraska team. I think Matt Rule was the right hire. We saw it last year while they were 5-7. They were heading in the right direction, in my opinion. They got better as the season went on, and they have a real opportunity here with an easy schedule and a potential star quarterback in the making to develop and turn this offense into a really solid unit that's a lot better than what they were last year. When you look at the stats, it's kind of crazy that they scored 18 points per game, which is not great, and they gave up 18.3 points per game. So they were right there, even in terms of the points per game. Just a crazy number when you really look at that. But this is a unit that's exciting. Both sides of the ball, I think, are exciting, have room to grow. I think Matt Rule is a fantastic head coach. I think Dylan Raiola has a lot of opportunity to step up. I think they will go 8-4 as well. I think they'll make a bowl game comfortably, which is something that they really want to get done in Lincoln. They have incredible fan support. They sell out that stadium, whether or not they're good or bad. And when they're good, it's going to be very loud, and they're going to be very hard to play in that stadium. It's going to be very loud. Big Red Nation is very strong out there in Nebraska. They have a great head coach and an easy schedule, in my opinion, a very favorable schedule, in my opinion. You dodge Michigan. Yes, you got to play Ohio State. It's certainly tough matchup, but you dodge Michigan as well. You dodge some other solid teams. You dodge Penn State, a team that they have struggles with in the past. So overall, I think this is a very exciting scheduling. They'll be able to beat Colorado early on. I think they'll be able to beat Illinois, Rutgers, Indiana, UCLA, and Wisconsin with ease. They could potentially pick off Purdue on the road as well, in my opinion, and get to 9 wins, which wouldn't be super crazy. I like this team a whole lot. I'm very high on this team. I think this team is very exciting and certainly one to check out this year if you have time on a Saturday to watch Nebraska. I think they're going to be a very interesting and exciting team.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be a fun team to watch this year. Typically in the past, it's not, especially last year, of how poor the offense played. It really was incredibly frustrating at times. I think this year, though, it's going to be really fun to watch this defense match with an improving offense. They can accomplish a lot, and I certainly think, if they have a 6-2 record going into Ohio State, it's going to be something to watch. Obviously, the road games are pretty tough for them. I see them losing those contests. Good team overall, good building blocks they have, and they're getting some good production out of their younger guys. So this is going to be a good team. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me to talk about the Huskers.
I'm looking forward to watching this team. I'm super excited to see how they play this year.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.